The sky did not warn them. There was no thunder in the distance, no storm rolling in from the sea, no omen written in the clouds, just a quiet evening on an island in the Dutch East Indies, what we now call Indonesia, where people went to sleep thinking tomorrow would be like any other day. But deep beneath the earth, something had already decided otherwise. On April 5, 1815, Mount Tambora began to speak. At first it was just a distant rumble. Villagers thought it was thunder trapped inside the mountain. Then the ground trembled, birds lifted from trees in sudden panic. Still, no one understood what was coming, because nobody alive had ever seen a mountain die like this before. Tambora was not just a volcano, it was a giant, once standing over 4,300 meters tall, one of the highest peaks in the region. Traders passed beneath it believing it eternal. They were wrong. People watched, confused, as the mountain released a column of gray that climbed higher and higher, turning sunlight pale and weak. On April 10, 1850, the mountain exploded. Witnesses later described it as if 3 suns had appeared in the sky and then been swallowed by darkness. The sound was so loud it was heard over 2,000 kilometers away. Ships near Sumatra thought they were under attack, but this was not war. This was geology at its most violent edge. Mount Tambora collapsed into itself, releasing an energy thousands of times greater than any modern nuclear weapon. The top of the mountain simply vanished, replaced by a collapsing void that swallowed forests, villages, and everything living within reach. A column of ash rose into the stratosphere, more than 40 kilometers high, piercing the sky like a black spear. Darkness began to spread. Ash fell like heavy rain, burying crops, poisoning rivers, collapsing roofs. People ran, but there was nowhere to run. The air itself became thick, acidic, suffocating. But the true horror was not just local, it was global, because Tambora had not only destroyed itself, it had injected millions of tons of sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere, where winds would carry it around the planet like an invisible curse. Around 10,000 people died immediately from pyroclastic flows, superheated clouds of gas and ash moving faster than any horse could escape. But that was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, hunger began to spread. Crops failed, fish died in poisoned waters, ash covered rice fields like a burial shroud. Survivors described the sun as dimmed, as if seen through thick black cloth. And then the sky itself began to change. Far away in places that had no idea a volcano had erupted, strange reports started appearing. In India, monsoon patterns became erratic. In China, summer rains failed. In Europe, something even more unsettling began. The summer of 1816 never came. Instead of warm winds and golden fields, there was frost. Snow fell in New England while farmers still wore winter coats. In Ireland, cold rain destroyed potato crops. In France, grain prices skyrocketed as harvest after harvest collapsed. People didn't understand what was happening. Some believed God was punishing humanity. Others thought the world was ending. Scientists, still in their early understanding of climate systems, had no explanation. The sun still rose every morning, but it was weaker, hazy, behind a curtain of smoke that never cleared. What nobody could see was that the entire planet was wrapped in a thin veil of volcanic dust and sulfur aerosols, reflecting sunlight back into space. Temperatures dropped by nearly 1 to 2 degrees Celsius globally. That might sound small, but in climate terms, it was catastrophic. Harvests failed across continents. Livestock died in fields that never warmed. Food shortages triggered migration, riots, desperation. In Switzerland, bread prices tripled. In Germany, famine spread. And in the midst of this global cold summer, something strange happened in a quiet villa in Geneva. A group of young writers, trapped indoors by relentless rain and freezing winds, began telling ghost stories to pass the time. One of them was Mary Shelley. The darkness outside, the unnatural cold, the sense that nature itself had turned hostile. It all seeped into her imagination. From that moment of climate chaos, a story was born that would later become Frankenstein, a creature assembled from my parts, brought to life in defiance of what I should become. In a way, it was the perfect metaphor for the year the earth itself felt dead. But back in the real world, suffering was not metaphorical. It was daily life. In some regions of Asia, entire communities were forced to migrate in search of food. In Europe, bread riots erupted. Governments struggled to maintain order. Diseases spread faster as weakened populations became vulnerable. And still, no one fully understood the cause. Volcanoes at that time were not connected to global climate. The idea that a single eruption on a remote Indonesian island could alter weather patterns across the planet was unimaginable. It would take decades for science to piece it together. Meanwhile, Mount Tambora itself was gone. What remained was a massive caldera, over 6 kilometers wide and 1,100 meters deep. A wound in the earth so large it could be seen from space today. The mountain that once stood proud had collapsed into an empty basin of ash and rock. Silence returned, but the world above was still suffering. It wasn't until years later that scientists began to connect the dots. Ice cores showing sulfur spikes, tree rings revealing sudden cooling, historical records describing the year without a summer. 1816 became known as a climatic anomaly, unlike any other in recorded history, all triggered by a single moment of geological rage. And yet the most haunting part of the Tambora eruption is not just its scale. It is how invisible its consequences were. A mountain explodes on one island, and a farmer in America loses his harvest. A volcano collapses, and a writer in Switzerland creates one of the most iconic monsters in literature. A moment of fire in Indonesia, and the entire northern hemisphere forgets what summer feels like. Even today, Mount Tambora stands as a warning, written in stone and ash, because it reminds us of something uncomfortable. The earth is connected in ways we cannot see, and when it changes, it does not ask permission. It simply happens, quietly at first, then all at once. And long after the smoke clears, long after the skies return to blue, the world remembers, not through sound or sight, but through absence. The absence of warmth, the absence of harvest, the absence of certainty. Because in 1815, the earth did not just erupt, it reset the sky.